Good morning, English 123. I'm recording outside today, and I think I've taken enough precautions to deal with wind and any traffic noise in the background. I've sampled it, and hopefully it's good enough. If this does cause any difficulty in hearing me, please give me that feedback so I don't do it again. But I think my Elite Gamer headset here with a little bit of filter should be enough to take care of it. All right, this is going to be a quicker lecture than on Mondays. We're just going to do a little bit of setup for what we need to be doing over the weekend and into next week. So I'm going to go ahead and go right to our lecture slides. And I think this is mostly focused on getting you into the mindset for how we talk about inquiry and the basic rhetorical appeals. What I want to start with is something that is just kind of a refresh for those of you who may not have engaged with the concept of the classical appeals for some time. It is talked about in English 122 and in many courses you may have taken before this point, but sometimes it does get a little bit rusty, and it's one of the old ways of thinking that actually still describes the world pretty effectively, almost without fault. And so the first of the classical appeals is that of ethos. Ethos is the idea that something has the authority to speak to a subject, that we look to people who have trust or respect or credentials or expertise. And there are ways you can accomplish it in a writing class or a writing assignment like this, where you yourself communicate your own level of ethos. So you ideally are going to be synthesizing your evidence from multiple sources. So if you're going to make a claim, you're not just going to claim and move on. You're going to make a claim that is provable, debatable, or falsifiable for those of you in the sciences backgrounds. So you go to an external source from someone who has expertise in the topic. Right now, ideally, if we're thinking of epidemiology, we're talking Anthony Fauci, because he's someone who is in a position of much respect in how viruses transmit and how they propagate. And we should be listening to him because he tells us things that are based off of a couple of factors. One, he has clearly a long history working in these topics. And two, he has the credentials, he has the background, he has the education. But other ways you communicate ethos yourself is you select support from authorities on the subject. So it's not just Fauci, it's other people in topics of epidemiology. Or if you're moving obviously away from the topic we're all tired of, if you're talking about music history, you don't just talk about your knowledge of important rock and other music movements in the 60s and 70s. You go to historians, people who have made their career, their life out of writing and publishing and talking about this because they get the expertise and they get the education or they get the firsthand experience. Other ways you communicate your ethos is by using appropriate citation and attribution. Okay, the wind hammers are kind of hard here. Hopefully it's not too bad. And you use you use citation and attribution to communicate that you're not only using evidence, but you know how to present it in a way that is understandable and fits within the expectations of the field in which you're writing or working in. You use fair language. You don't go to extremes in rhetoric. You can definitely find ways within ethos to make emphasis very clear, but you're not resorting to broad, brash statements. And you're writing in a way that matches the audience or the text, the tone, the familiarity. You wouldn't write a paper for eighth graders with the same level of rhetorical jargon and technical jargon as something from the New England Journal of Medicine. It would just go way over their heads. And you flip that, you wouldn't write something from your your high school papers and submit it to a highly respected journal and expect them to find the tone and the rhetoric to match. So ethos, in a nutshell, authority, credibility. The next one is something that we're all very familiar with, and it's one of the most potent and often used of the appeals, but it's also one of the most dangerous, and that is pathos. That's where you consider the audience's needs or their values or things that they believe in. It's very heavily predicated on emotion. So when people argue against something based off of their personal feeling, their opinion, it may absolutely be informed by something that's true and valid and a reasonable thought, but ultimately it is something that's coming from an internal sense of what's important. And you can't expect that to have the same weight and the same credibility as something that's ethos driven. Yet, that is the modern discourse in most of our politics. So you don't have to look very far to virtually any political speech, political rhetoric, and not hear something that is rife with pathos and often very little of the two other appeals. It's just kind of how we trade our conversations in politics and in public discourse. So when you get into arguments with someone where you feel right, but that little feeling in the back of your head knows that you really don't have a leg to stand on, you're probably relying on pathos. And I'm sure you have experienced no shortage of people who you've seen are very pathos-driven individuals in your lives. And they don't often actually back up what they're saying. They just shout it, and it doesn't actually get support. But I'm speaking very negatively of pathos at the start here because I just want to caution you against overuse of it. Pathos is absolutely a great combo to use with other appeals. It's excellent at creating a sense of urgency. It's excellent at translating abstract concepts into emotionally connecting statements and emotionally connecting ideas. But it's very often overused by itself. So going back to our idea of something in ethos, if you're arguing, and I always get myself into trouble when I try and come up with topics right off the bat. So I'm going to go back to the tired one of the coronavirus spread we're seeing. You can argue off of ethos. Facts show how transmission works. But if someone argues against it on a pathos sense, that they don't like that they have to do certain things to maintain a lower level of spread in their communities, they can't argue for poor epidemiological behavior against something that's credibility based. So when those two come into direct conflict with each other, the pathos arguer may feel like they're winning because it feels so passionately strong, but the ethos arguer is the one who has the high ground because they're ultimately maintaining an argument based off of something factual or something credible based or credibility based. And then finally, logos. Logos is the driest, but it's also exceptionally potent because this ultimately is something that goes very hand in hand with your average ethos argument. A logos argument is something that is logical for the purpose, and you can see obviously that root in the word there. It's something that explains appropriate background information and provides data or evidence with sources. So, Fauci can just say, we need to wear masks. We need to practice social distancing. We need to stop going to bars and to restaurants. But if he just says that from his authority, that's better than just emotional appeal alone. But then he can pivot to information that's taken from contact tracing and from epidemiological science that says, hey, when people don't wear masks and they go to a restaurant, the risk factors go up X% because we have enough data from people who have done their contact tracing at restaurants. It's something that's hard, it's fact, it's real, and it should not be refutable because science is irrefutable. Science is a truth as much as anything can be. And so that is the type of logic that logos enables. It isn't always something so data driven. It can be semantic argument. It can be a semantic point that, much like classical rhetoric, if I take point A as true and point B as true, then I'm going to argue logically that point C must also be true. But that obviously is a slightly larger burden. It's much more philosophical, and that can still be open you up to a bit more of a subjective response. So in a brief sense, these three appeals are going to be found in some balance everywhere in our world, in virtually every communication you see, every argument, every advertisement, everything that's trying to make a point to you and try and get you to think something persuasively. You'll see these three in action in varying degrees. The best arguments are the ones that find the right time to use all three and don't try and rely on only one. Because, as much as I was talking about the peril of overemphasizing pathos, if you give someone a pure logos-driven argument, it may be true, it may be 100% supportable, but it may risk that it could also go over the heads of some audiences, or it could seem overly dry. And that's the time that you want to be able to connect with someone that gives them a pathos translation of the logos basis. So normally in an in-person class, I would show a clip that I think gave you a good example of the three appeals in action. In this case, I'm going to give you the option to go and find one of your own. I think that one of the best places you can find a nice balance of all three of the classical appeals is in satire news and satire comedy discussion of news. So for anyone who's familiar with Last Week Tonight, that's an excellent source for this. I would encourage you to maybe go find one of the main segments on whatever topic you find interesting. They've been recording now for 5 years. And so they go from everything to politics, to science, to social issues, and a lot of the space between. And you will find that if you watch it in that 15 to 20-minute segment, that Oliver and the writers make effective use of all three appeals at some point. And I'm going to kind of come back to this a little bit in the discussion next week and ask those of you who had a chance to look at this what you think about it. I'll tack that on to our reading discussion for next week. So look for that. And if you get a chance to look for one of these videos, I really suggest it. All right. We're probably about halfway through here, maybe a little bit more. And I want to just kind of begin setting up for what you're going to be doing over the weekend. And that is talking about inquiry. Inquiry is a critical concept that we use every day. Whenever you want to know something more, you are engaging in inquiry. Maybe you don't follow through on that notion, but ultimately, whenever you have any desire to learn more about a subject or to research something that's bothering you or is a concern or interesting to you, you're engaging in the act of inquiry. And inquiry can be a really critical part of an assignment like this that this course is ultimately leading you towards, because if you use it with some reflection and some planning, it helps you move from broad hunches to focused, clear, concise, tiny points you want to make. One of the common things you'll hear writing instructors like me say is that we always feel the urge to stay broad when we're planning our paper topics because it gives us a sense that we have more stuff to talk about. But in reality, when you get yourself down to that tiny little issue, the reason one group has greater difficulty in a certain situation than another academically, or the reason why one state is experiencing a greater number of cases than another, I'm sorry, of coronavirus cases, you have a small question that you now have a very refined, detailed answer you can go find, and all your research can work towards that. So in this type of application, you really want to start with the idea of expanding on a curiosity. I sincerely want every single one of you to pick a topic that you care about and could actually sustain your interest. And that happens professionally. People tend to think of what happens in, sorry, that may be a little loud. People tend to think what happens professionally, in academic senses as very dry and boring, but those people really care about those topics. No one stays researching the life cycle of a specific breed of ticks in the Amazon rainforest if they don't like it. But for some reason, in their bug interests, that's important to them. So I want you to look for something that's similarly curious and fun or enjoyable to you. So you want to explore many different topics aspects of an issue. It is much narrower than just a topic. You'll often hear people say, oh, my topic is I'm writing on blah. But really, you should be looking for an issue, something that has friction, something that there's a question where someone wants to know more. Because when you just state a topic level, you haven't drilled down far enough, and that's when you end up writing about something rather than arguing for something. So I want you to think in a descending order of scope. You start with a subject. A subject is broad. A subject is the biggest possible division of information. So we can go with athletics as a subject. You can't write about athletics because what the hell would you pick in that? There's a lot of things in athletics. You can find a topic. Okay, so a topic within athletics may be multiple things you're interested in. You may be interested in greater access for women in college level sports. You may be interested in abuse of steroids. You may be interested in over overtraining or therapies for people who experience sports related injuries. But then you find an issue within it. So the ones I just mentioned, let's say you really are interested both in maybe women's access to sports in college level, but also you're still a little interested in steroids. So you think, hey, maybe there's an issue of, do women feel the pressure to, in order to get the best possible performance, do they feel a disproportionate pressure to engage in steroid use? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. This is a question that's beginning to ferment in your head now. That's when you arrive at a researchable question. That's when you say, okay, I don't know enough about something, but I have enough of a framing of idea where of things I can go find information about. So if we're going with my example of steroid abuse for women in college level sports, that should spin you up into a couple of other questions that will help you further understand that idea. You'll think, okay, how would I measure steroid abuse? Okay, there's probably data out there that talks about how often steroids are used in college level sports. I wonder if any of that data talks about women. If you are thinking further about motivations, you may think about, I wonder if there's anybody who's talked a profile about the pressures of college level sports for women versus men. And you need to work that process and get as many of these compatible questions that are part of your research question out and framing and giving you different perspectives. You're not arguing anything yet. You are not yet at I've got morning doves hooting out here. I don't know if you guys can hear them. You're not arguing for something yet. You're not made a point because you're still gathering information. You're still framing how you understand your own research question. Eventually, once you gather that information, you will probably have enough of an informed position that you can actually arrive at a focused thesis. That thesis itself is the answer to your research question. And that's the kind of process I want you to take yourself through when you begin shaping topic selection for this coming paper. So often, the beginning of an argument is good inquiry that leads you to a good research question that itself becomes the thesis that you're trying to argue for. If you go backwards on this and you start with a thesis, I want to argue whatever your particular pet issue is, you may have done one of two things. On the good side, maybe this is something you've been thinking on for a long time and you're inherently already informed about it. And that's not a bad position to start from because you can back up and try and think about how to further refine your knowledge. If you find yourself in this mindset where you feel like you already have something at the beginning of this whole process that you want to argue for, that can work. Just please step back up a couple steps and assume you don't know everything. You have to go back to that research question phase. But more often what happens is you start at a thesis statement or a claim statement at the very beginning and you're not very well informed and you just try and argue that hunch from the beginning. Guess where you end up? Pathos. You're arguing from emotion. You're arguing from a belief that may not be examined, and you're probably not going to be as compatible to arguing from logos and ethos, from logic and authority. So listen to yourselves as we start this topic selection. Listen to your internal dialogue. It's very important that you understand the difference between a hunch that you don't really have anything to work with and a true passion that you can develop further. So I'm talking about our assignments coming up next. By the time I post this video, this link will be available on our homepage for you to introduce essentially the potential research question that I want you to go through. This is the assignment that will be due not this Sunday coming, but the Sunday after that with our workshop next Thursday. So we're still about a week out from when the first workshop happens, and there's lots of steps to go through between here and there. But I want to get you to start thinking about the assignment you're ultimately producing. You're going to introduce, but absolutely not begin writing a miniature argument for the potential research question that you can develop for the researched argument that eventually will complete this course. I really want you to choose your topic wisely as I go through on the handout, on the rubric I'm going to have provided for you. Approach those polarizing topics carefully. It's very easy for us to want to go towards the big ones, the gun control, obviously right now, things like police brutality, and maybe you're even really passionate about something like epidemiology because of what's been happening in the past couple of months. But whatever topic you choose, especially if it's one of those big ones that tend to really put people into very polarized, yay or nay, pro, con organization. I'm not saying you can't do those. I'm just saying you really need to think very carefully about how you're going to find the space between those places, that you're not just going to go to an emotional hunch argument. Because that's where you get in trouble, and that's where the papers tend to break down into those pathos-driven arguments. I want you to suggest a developing thesis or claim that may come out of your research question. It's not one you're going to be married to. You can absolutely abandon it after this research proposal. I want you to include a comprehensive subtopic summary. I want you to essentially list, not in bullets, but in just a conversational walkthrough, the potential sub-issues that may be interesting in this. So, if we're going back to the example I had of steroid abuse for women in college level sports, possible subtopics, by no means all of the subtopics, and you shouldn't try and fit every single subtopic you think of. Maybe emotional pressures or scholastic pressures, or low-level support because they tend to have lower-level scholarships, if scholarships at all, or potentials for careers involving their sports after college. Does that create an exertion, or does that exert pressure on them to excel now so they can do something later? Do they tend to have income differences? Does this tend to be disproportionately higher income or lower income people? And this is just me rattling a few things off the top of my head, and it's probably nowhere near the most interesting things you could think of in that particular topic. But that is something to just kind of give you a taste of the kind of thinking I want you to go through. I want you to pull these little things apart. That's the framing we talked about a few minutes ago. Explain your research plans. Where do you intend to go for your research? What types of sources do you want to look for? What types of data do you think will be relevant to you? What types of authorities or who do you think will be something or will be worth consulting with? This is only 300 to 600 words. The average college level writing is roughly 300 words a page, a little bit less. So we're talking 1 to 2 pages. For a first assignment, very easy. It's very internal. There's nothing that you need to externally cite or get involved in this yet. So I think this is going to be very realistic for you to do in the next week. But of course, this is a summer class, so don't let this languish too long as I go through the next few days worth of content that you probably heard. I do live near a busy intersection. Okay. I am expecting professional, well-edited academic voice in MLA style. I will have, by the time you get into the drafting stage here, linked you directly to the OWL MLA page. It's really super easy to Google if you haven't ever used it before. At this point, most people arrive in these classes with having seen the OWL at some point, but simply Google OWL MLA. It takes you to the Purdue University Online Writing Lab, which has great information on how to do both general and fine level format for MLA and APA, and to a lesser extent, other styles like Chicago and Turabian. All right, so all this is in service of this next quick write. In this quick write, I want you to have submitted by Monday. But what I want you to think about this is a very casual, reflective process. No polish, no perfect explanation is due at this point. This is before we get to the assignment. I want you to just kind of do a quick reflection on, what do you care about? If you were able to enact any change in an issue or a problem you see in the world at large or in a community, what would you focus on? What goals do you think you could set, and how could you accomplish it? Or, said a different way, what are you simply passionate about? It doesn't have to be these big issues. You don't have to cure cancer. You don't have to solve police brutality. That is above your pay grade right now. If there's something you just simply care about, that you are interested in, okay, maybe I shouldn't record outside for noise, not because of wind and cars, but because of the freaking sirens. I think I'm still coming through clearly, so I'll take this as as a learning experience for me. What are you simply passionate about? What do you care about? Do you have a hobby? If someone was of a like mind, what could you talk about for hours with no interruption, because you both are passionate about it? And I'm going to leave that much more wide open. You can do what you want with that if you go with it. You may or may not develop it further, but this is a good time to kind of just put that out there. This is going to be due Monday night, July 6th. Again, like everything else, 11:59 p.m. This is a 100 to 150 word short response. Super, super easy. Not meant to be challenging. It's meant to simply get you thinking, because very shortly after that, I'll be trying to speak with each of you briefly in kind of a generative session, one-on-one over Zoom, to try and see where you want to take this into the actual proposal potentially. So to wrap up, your to-do is, we still have tonight to do the week 1 reading discussion. Go to the discussion boards for that. We still have due tonight the syllabus quiz. Only a few have been submitted so far, so please make sure you don't miss that. That is our first quick write. That is a super easy 10 points. The research tutorial module from the library is due on Friday. That is the first one. No one's taken it yet, so please make sure you don't forget about that. New, the quick write I just assigned, due Monday night. And also on Friday, I'm going to put up a separate announcement, maybe a short video, like a few minutes, or maybe just an announcement on Canvas about the signups and the process for our inquiry conferences, where we will talk about what you want to do for your research proposal. All right, that is it for me. I am going to hopefully, when I edit this, not find any horrible points of being drowned out by sirens and barking dogs. But if so, I will keep that in mind for the future. I think this is usable. We'll go with it. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Please talk to me. And if you haven't yet, drop by the introductions thread on Canvas, because I've already seen a couple of super interesting posts, and I always enjoy learning more about you and getting to see some of the people who are actually people outside of the classroom setting or the online setting. Take care of yourselves, and look for my next video by Monday.